episode is made possible by OIT VoIP. Find your best-in-class revenue generation for MSPs all over the world. Learn more via the link in the show notes.
Oh, wait, where did that sound come from? There we go. There we go. Now we're live. I was like, I'm hearing myself. All right. Welcome to MSC Dispatch Live Show 6/19/2024. We have some news for you. So let's get started and start sharing the things. I should have clicked this beforehand. There we go. There we go. I was only a second behind this time. You don't do it for a couple of weeks. You forget where the button goes. Let's start with some VMware news because this is something rather critical. VMware fixes critical vCenter RCE vulnerability patch now. VMware issued security advisory addressing critical vulnerabilities in vCenter server, including an RCE remote code execution and privilege escalation flaws. Now, one of the things I know is they are still, despite VMware, and maybe they have some more money to do this now. They've raised the prices. They've caused all kinds of disruption since the Broadcom purchase, but they are still pushing out the patches. They're still on top of these as best I can tell. So that's a good thing because VMware has a lot of legacy code. So you're going to get some bugs that people are going to continue to find as these things go. And as these things go, a 9.8 critical is not good. Heap overflow vulnerability in the DCE RPC protocol implementation of vCenter allows a malicious actor network access to send specially crafted packets, potentially leading to the RCE. And they have another one. It's also 9.8, and the last one's only a 7.8. Arises from a misconfiguration of sudo and vCenter server permitting an authenticated local user to exploit this flaw to elevate their privileges to root on a vCenter appliance. So these are all available updates. The thing I'm not as clear on is whether or not vCenter has pushed some, or VMware has pushed some of these behind any types of logins or paywalls or things like that. I'm kind of curious of what their status is related to that. But at least we do see them pushing out fixes. Kind of continuing on the VMware and how things are going. This is an interesting one here. So Nutanix is handing Bain Capital $1.7 billion amid continued growth. This is kind of a backhanded way to say thanks, VMware, for doing this for us. To roll things back a little bit here of how things are going at Nutanix, we'd have to look at the way this works. So Nutanix went public in 2016. Then in September of 2020, they take some funding from Bain, and it arranged a $750 million investment from them. And then the revenues at that time were about 314 to 328 million a quarter, but they were filing losses. Matter of fact, the losses continued all the way till February of this year was the first time they were ever profitable. That's one of the things I had talked about before when I was discussing with people. People said, well, what about Nutanix? I said, if you look prior to this year, Nutanix as a publicly traded company was up for sale because they're trying to, solve some of those continuing to lose money. And playing the long game is really hard, waiting for competitors to mess up. It's not that Nutanix is bad. It just didn't offer enough differences in VMware to make people move over to it. That being said, people kind of stick with what they know until there's a reason to change. That reason to change can be it doesn't perform as well. It doesn't have security fixes, which, VMware doesn't have performance problems and the security fixes are rolling out. But that whole 10 to 15x price increase thing, it got a lot of people, and people are looking for alternatives, and Nutanix is among the alternatives that people are landing on. So it's kind of interesting to see Nutanix go from a company for sale to a company not only able to make a profit, they're actually able to hand over profits to some of the investors that help them out. So I find it kind of interesting that they're, moving along with that. Definitely, it's a good thing overall. I think the diversification we're seeing of the hypervisor market is a good thing because VMware, they were just kind of on that pedestal for a while. Just everyone used VMware until they didn't. And they didn't is where we're at now. Moving on. Gen AI, more buzz than biz as tech barely dents jobs. Yes, at any given moment, the AI system is always something. I think the one thing AI generates the most is news, either by people having it create articles or by normal people like myself just talking about AI or humans talking about AI. Lots of information around this, but none of it's really good to me. Despite astronomical vendor evaluations, predictions it will transform society, the impact of Gen AI in the workplace has yet to materialize, according to a recent global survey. AI has seen a brand equity implosion in 2024. The promise of the AI brand is that it'll either kill us or save us, and it's done really neither. It's just, as I kind of noted, made a lot of news, hallucinated a lot of interesting, fun things, and it's really a topic of a lot of catastrophizing. It's just not really there yet. These people who keep thinking it can replace someone, I keep seeing people really get excited about it, but it doesn't really work that way. Especially, I maybe I'll tweet this out later as a discussion I had with my friends, and we were kind of laughing about it. I said, "Would you hire an employee who randomly hallucinates and just gives the most confident, weird answer?" And they're like, "Well, why would I hire an employee that randomly hallucinates? That seems like an awful idea." And that's the problem we have in solvable AI. It will confidently tell you the wrong thing. It will put code in that may destroy something. And yeah, the fact that it can, hallucinate completely incorrect answers. I mean, you wouldn't hire someone who did that. You wouldn't say, "I got this guy 4 days of the week. He's great. The fifth day, he drops a hit of acid, but we don't know what day that is. It's a random day, and he has all kinds of wild thoughts, and doesn't do his job very well." I mean, think about that from a hiring standpoint, and it would be like, "Oh yeah, I don't think I'd hire someone who kind of randomly." Gave me confident wrong information. I don't know. It's kind of my until that problem solved, and I don't think that's easily solvable. I mean, there's been a lot of researchers who are not tied to the hype cycle of making the number go up to the right and getting investors excited. Real researchers who actually talk about this from a very tactical and scientific approach, going, "Yeah, this is not an easy problem to solve, and at the current generation we are, and the way we do things, there's not a solvable way for this because of the way it iterates." And I I haven't seen much scientific evidence. There's always people who are trying to raise capital telling me it can be solved. Just need more money. I need more training data than exists, and more content than humanity has ever created, and copyright be damned, and we can get this AI thing working. So people are kind of feeling it, going, "We've been hearing this for a few years now, and a lot of money's been spent, and we're not really there yet." But it is still interesting. It's not that it's not completely useful. I have differently things I use on it, and I'm not going to rant too much about it, but I still think it's interesting to market it. The market softening maybe a little bit on there. Maybe we finally reach peak buzz of AI, and maybe we'll figure out what is actually useful from this technology. Moving on to Supermicro. Oh, I just like this. Supermicro plans to flood the market with liquid cooled data center tech. I think this is really great. So, Supermicro is kind of on the leading edge. And the problem isn't that liquid cooling, as we love it in our gaming systems and all the fun things that we have, especially I'm a big fan of like the PC builds where people really take and make some really cool things. And you're always thinking, well, why can't this apply to data centers? And obviously, you've not been in data centers or spent a lot of time with people who try to make standards for things and realize, oh, it's a giant hodgepodge. Well, I think Supermicro might have enough pull, and building out these proofs of concepts is really going to be interesting. Supermicro is planning additional facilities to meet the increasing demand for liquid cooled data infrastructure, and will focus on delivering entire installations to customers. This is huge because that is where the real challenge comes in, is trying to make sure that we have a standard, a common way we can plug things in. Now, if this gets kind of standardized, I think that'll be pretty cool. I've actually talked to other companies that are just creating like in rack liquid coolers so the cooling can be closer to where the heat's generated as opposed to the way airflow goes. Matter of fact, just Google a few images on how airflow works in data centers. You're like, that's kind of interesting. I did cover that a bit in my data center video you'll find on my channel, where I did a whole tour of it. But there's a lot there. There's a lot to getting all of that heat exchanged and doing it at the closest level. We know from, as I noted, building gaming servers is a great thing. So it's kind of cool to see they're really pushing away for this. And I hope we get some standardization out of it in the big picture, because liquid cooled data centers seem pretty cool and higher efficiencies. Cooling is a huge cost to data centers, and maybe we can bring those costs down, and then allegedly we will get cheaper services in the cloud. I don't think so, but I mean, the hope is there. uh Now, I only really have this article in here because I wanted to make some bread puns, Panera Bread likely paid a ransom in March for ransom attacks, so they coughed up some dough and paid out the ransom. Any other bread puns, please leave them in the comments. I just want it in there. This is going to be interesting as these companies, and there's a Reddit thread on this that kind of started it, and it's talking about the employee data being uh, saved by paying the ransom so it wouldn't get leaked. This is one of those things. Like they actually were able to recover and have the backups. And this is why the extortionware is becoming so popular. Companies have got better at backups. That has now led to less ransoms being paid unless there's an extortion piece of it. And the extortion piece is tough. And because you're really trying to trust the reputation of they won't just take the money and also still leak the data, because once they have the money, what's stopping them other than a criminal's promise to do it? So I thought it was still, you know, it's still interesting on there, and we'll see how that works. The wording does sound like they paid the ransom. I don't know where this falls on that. It's gonna be dicey as things go. And if yeah, Matt Fox, throw in some more bread puns in there. I definitely I that kind of makes these kind of fun to talk about. But moving on. And speaking about cloud things that are a little goofy and never price go down, FTC files complaint against Adobe for deceptive cancellation practices. Oh, yes, Adobe, you finally pushed it too far. And I'm glad to see organizations working on our behalf going, these people have pushed this a little far. So FTC says the first violation is the enrollment process, which occurs before user attempts cancellation, as Adobe allegedly hides the details of the annual paid monthly subscription plan, including the early termination fee. According to the complaint, when consumers purchase a subscription through the website, Adobe pushes consumer to its annual paid monthly subscription plan, pre-selecting it as default. Yes, it's one of those things where I don't think anywhere outside of California, which is kind of an interesting side note, if you go to cancel some services, California and maybe a couple other states, but California I know has this law in there where it's a consumer protection law that you have to have online cancellation if you have online sign up. But some companies have done things to skirt that. But if you're in California, you'll actually get different menus that come up. And I thought, well, isn't that kind of a hack? I can just lie to these companies and say I live in California because it'll change some of their rules, because they're like, oh crap, there's actually privacy protection rules for there. But we really need a federal law that governs a lot of this. And we need a FTC that does these things. And now they're doing it. So I'm actually happy that the FTC is filing these complaints because these companies kind of dump on us. And I mean, Adobe has a product that we kind of have to use if you're in the creative space. I say have to. There are other options, I'll admit, but they've really locked it in. And screwing around with the way you cancel and the way you sign up is, yeah, not good. Don't screw around people on that. So I'm happy to see that they're pushing that. Let's move on to some news about FBI Cyber Assistant Director Brian Vorden's remarks at the 2024 Boston Conference of Cybersecurity. This is pretty awesome. Briefly, we have Title 18 authority to investigate computer intrusions. We have a specific authority with Rule 41, which governs search and seizure, allowing the FBI to seize malware covertly installed on U.S. infrastructure and our adversaries. We have specific counterintelligence authorities, allowing the FBI to be integrally involved in a nation-state campaign targeting U.S.-based organizations. And we have the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, authoring Title I, Title III of Section 702. All this to say that they have been inside and now have a few things to talk about. Specifically, they actually have a bunch of keys. So FBI recovers about 7,000 lockpick keys and says, hey, reach out if you've got some encrypted data you want pulled back. This is really good. The FBI, they're tasked with the protection here in the US and saying that they've gotten into these systems. There's a lot of diciness, and there's another book out that kind of covers the dicey nature of them running Anam, which was a whole nother topic that maybe we'll get into. But there's a new book out about the FBI running a anonymous criminal focused phone service. And that book is by Joseph Cox. I'm pretty, I should pull that up real quick. Joseph, I didn't have it in the notes. Cox book, Anam, Dark Wire. Highly recommend this. It was also the most recent Darknet Diaries episode. But this particular book covers some of the FBI's involvement in that. And this is where you can get into some of those questionable legalities. That's why this started with the statement of where does the FBI's authority lie in this? We are happy with the results, though, so we have to always decide where those things are and where those lines need to be drawn. But having 7,000 keys released from Lockbit, definitely a good thing. The agencies, and these are often coordinated efforts, are going more after these ransomware people, which I think is huge. That is a pretty good step in the right direction, because the disruption that the authorities cause to these companies is extremely damaging to them. This breaks the confidence they have in each other, because they all have to run around pointing the finger, saying who's the mole, who did this, who was part of the problem. And then if they can't sustain that, or the criminals kind of collapse in on themselves, they're less organized to do the attacks they do. They can't operate at the scale they operate. Ultimately, security is really hard. It's always us as the IT and MSP space that are tasked with protecting and putting these things and measures in place to stop these attacks from happening. But these companies really, it's kind of a coordinated effort. It's not a thing that's going to fix this problem. It's defense in depth. It's having, our US agencies coordinating with other agencies outside the US, coordinated efforts of attacking and taking down these things, all these different groups, and also us doing everything we can to protect our clients. And it's, the combination of it is what solves it. There's not, despite what some vendor has told you, there's not an end all be all for security solutions. It is a giant ecosystem, and there's a lot of moving parts, and we're all trying to move towards a more secure future. At least that's what I think or hope we're doing. Now, this one, oh, it broke. That is not good. So let me find the original, because is there a way back? Well, I'm gonna pull up the archive.org of this. I think this article got too popular, and that's probably why it's broken. So let's pull up the Wayback One machine, and hopefully we can find a copy of this. Oh, good, we can. There we go. We'll just share it from the Wayback. See, this is why the Internet Archive is also an incredibly important thing to have. Give me your Fortinet configuration. Give me your Fortinet configuration, and I'll rule your network. This is an interesting write-up. And the part that's kind of interesting is this. Fortinet is full of, well, just some legacy code. One day in the future, it will all be rewritten. It's kind of being rewritten piece by piece. The part that made me laugh, and this is why it was titled, and we'll pull it up right here, Mary had a little. This is the part that really just kind of irked me here. It's Mary had a little lamb, but it's only partially in there because of the way they did the encryption. And then this is a hard-coded credential. There's a lot of reverse engineering and a couple series of write-ups of how these security researchers go through this. Now, the problem is, and this is the part that drives me nuts, Fortinet is not a small company. It's extremely popular in the IT space. And I poke at them a lot because you feel like they could just refactor the code instead of each time someone referencing here in 2024. And this research was published all the way here in June of 2024, but it references the 2019 research someone did. And they said, where there's smoke, there's fire. So someone reverse engineered how it was being done before to figure out another way to attack a Fortinet now. And so this was all submitted, and it's just kind of a series of rabbit holes of how this person got the code execution, how they were able to get in there, not code execution, how they cracked the password to be able to reverse engineer. This was not an RCE. But it's such a mess. And I'm just like, they did the responsible disclosure thing. But the part that drove me nuts as well is this starts in October of 2023. And it took them a long time to get the CVE. And they published the advisory on June 11th. That's about 250 days. And to me, for a company that is publicly traded, that is well in use in all these sectors of government, business, and IT, and popular amongst the IT service space, I just don't think that's acceptable to take that long to fix these problems. Not to mention, why are these external researchers finding it, and why aren't more internal people finding it? That's the part that's kind of driving me just bananas with Fortinet, and why I keep picking on them and making fun of them all the time. And to kind of go further, China's FortiGate attacks are more extensive than we first thought. Why? Because these problems exist in the ecosystem that they have. The Netherlands Cybersecurity Agency says previously reported attack on the country's Ministry of Defense was far more extensive than previously thought. And the NSC first published details of the Chinese state-sponsored malware campaign in February, but has continued investigations along with military intelligence and security service (MIVD) and the General Intelligence Security (AIVD). The attackers were using a stealthy malware the NC a lot of acronyms here, NCSC calls coat hanger after targeting 48 boxes. And this is a different CVE because actually the flaw in question was the 2022 buffer overflow bug. Without going into specifics, they said the types of victims included several Western governments. Now, the overflow bug, this is a kind of a debrief. It isn't like they got popped today by their unpatched 2022 box. It's that these were getting popped, and then these people were roaming around for a much longer time than expected. So this goes back to, the security researcher digging up some 2019 data to find something that they actually were working on in October that we didn't get a patch for until June. So in between, besides the security researcher, how many other people were using that type of flaw to get into these particular systems to be able to dive into these 48 systems and pivot through people's networks, especially because with the VPN specifically, you're usually tying that to your Active Directory. So you have one common user base, and then they have some credentials. This is where credential leaks are a pretty big deal. Or even though you're like, well, it's just my AD users and they're local, so no one can really log in, except for they tied it to the VPN. So they do have the potential to log in, or even, pivot through the network and elevate credentials and go from there. So kind of an interesting cycle of problems with 48, and I'm hoping they get addressed and fixed. Microsoft, and it's finally kind of been killed off here, at least for now. It's been delayed. This was like the ultimate capture the flag event, if you will, by security researchers for just all the silliness going around with the Microsoft recall feature. Like, let's just drop this whole spyware thing right on here. No need to install a spyware app. It'll do everything. And we can thank Kevin Beaumont, aka Gossi the Dog, his blog Double Pulsar. He talked a lot about it. And this TechDirt article just kind of dives into the fun of Microsoft. And I don't think there's malicious intent with Microsoft. I think we have out of touch executives. That's probably the easier way to say it, where they're just trying to figure out a way to sell us on AI. We, as I noted in one of the early articles, we haven't really found that killer use case for it yet. I mean, don't get me wrong, AI does an amazing job on creating YouTube titles for me and all kinds of fun, textual things. But having a spyware thing that just is able to dump all the data, everything I type, all my two factors. Matter of fact, not just your two factors. Think about the ability to re-pull up the QR codes that you scanned for the two factors. So this data exfiltration potential is really scary. And the reality is Microsoft is trying to tell us to trust them despite them having an entire history of unearned trust. They're like, but we get it right this time. We're Microsoft. We signed that thing that says we're going to be more secure going forward. But there's no proof in that. And this whole system was so easy to exfil all the data. Proof of concept code was dumped out there pretty quickly. So they're kind of backpedaling on all of it now. And I think that's for the better. It's not that I can't say it wouldn't be useful for a normal person to have a searchable index of all things done on a computer. There's a cool concept there, but I have to weigh it out with my security brain and go, hey, this may not be the most secure idea. So the idea of having all my data in one contained corpus of knowledge that's easily accessible is so cool, unless there's a security problem with it. And then you think about that as oh boy, they have everything I've ever typed on this computer in one place, and it can be exfiltrated in a matter of seconds on a high bandwidth connection. Yeah, I'm kind of glad they've done that. Last couple articles here. We've got the snowflake thing. And I say thing because this is dumb. And I want to know from you, who's at fault here? So first we thought it was Snowflake had a misconfiguration. Then we learned it was dumber. And it was that a script was written and a bunch of credentials were dumped because no one ever rotates credentials. Why would we do that? And this doesn't require it anymore. And this is a time where maybe credentials, if you think they've ever been stolen, should be rotated once in a while. Essentially, lots of customers without two-factor being able to log into the Snowflake instances for the database storage. So Ticketmaster was definitely the big one here. But I think companies are trying to distance themselves and just talk about the fact that there was a like they've lost data, but they don't want to admit it was Snowflake, because the Mandiant right up here is pretty damning for any company involved. Is specifically, and I highlighted here, the gaming. So, in several Snowflake related investigations, Mandiant observed that the initial compromise for the info stealers or malware occurred on a contractor system that were also used for personal activities, including gaming and downloading pirated software. So, now that we know how the info stealers got there and that they got the creds and there was no two factor turned on, the reason I say Snowflake is still a little bit at fault here is because there's definitely a meeting going on where Snowflake said, somebody said, hey, let's make this easy and not force 2FA. And then somewhere, as they had big companies like Ticketmaster and other large corporate companies, they're going, hey, should we tell them they should turn on two-factor? And someone's like, don't bother them. We don't really want that. And it's just kind of mind-boggling, especially when companies that have passed a SOC 2 and all kinds of fun, fancy audits, and then you're like, well, how can this happen in a company that passes audits? And right here, contractors, there's this carve-out exemption called, we just let the contractors do whatever they want. We let them play games on their computers. We let them, do fun things like download pirated software and have credentials with no 2FA that gets sucked up by an info stealer. So I do blame both companies. First, companies that not have proper controls, not taking the time to audit, not taking the time to put 2FA on, and Snowflake for allowing it. And they're going to get dragged in the news here, even though they didn't actually do it. So that's, that's kind of a lot. So let me know who you think's at fault, or both of them. And that's probably, I think, the correct answer. But let me know. I'm always curious on people's opinion on that. Last article here is LastPass says 12-hour outage caused by bad Chrome extension update. This is kind of an interesting in terms of, I guess some people are still using LastPass and they haven't moved over to someone else because LastPass completely, built the password market as we know it for managing passwords and then destroyed their reputation much the same way Snowflake has, where you get in the news a lot because you weren't doing security well. And then, of course, having, I believe it was a Plex running on the system that led to LastPass's compromise. And that compromise was obviously a huge disaster. But what made this interesting to me is I've seen this happen where you can push a minor update to Chrome and it will break something in terms of like the plugins themselves. And I wonder how many other things are susceptible to this, and how do you fix this or deal with this as a IT or MSP service provider? Because it looked like the site was down, and with people not running really applications anymore. And I know you could log into the LastPass actual site and probably get to your passwords without people running any desktop apps as much anymore. This is kind of interesting because it's a major outage. And when you are telling everyone to use a password manager and then that password manager fails, so I don't think this helped LastPass's reputation at all, but it also just kind of made me think of the fallback for, we don't really have a way to do versioning. Once a new version is pushed to a plugin, to my knowledge, there's not any easy way to roll back to that previous version, not from our standpoint as the managed service provider, but from the LastPass standpoint. So something else to chew on there that was kind of interesting. And, just another slap in the face to people who were using LastPass. And did they take that 12 hours to start looking at other solutions? I have a feeling maybe a few people did. At least that's my thought on there. But as always, we love hearing from you. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. What do you like or not like about MSP Dispatch? I'd like to hear from you. We've got a Discord. Join me over at the MSP Media Network. Sorry, words are hard sometimes. Do feel free to tag me in Discord because sometimes I get too many notifications. If I try to look at all the Discords, if you tag me, I can see the tag notifications, which are a lot handier. So I can go, hey, I will reply to that. But we're easy to find. Join us over in that Discord. Join us over on the all the different shows that go on MSP Dispatch. Like, subscribe, and see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.